Hey guys, and welcome back to another segment of the Top 10 Most Underrated Type series. So this one is a bit of an interesting situation, because some time ago on the Underrated Fire Types video, I asked you guys which type you all wanted to see me cover next. The top comment for that was Ice. I already did Ice though, so feel free to go watch it if you haven't already. I'll try to remember to leave a link in the description below. We'll be covering Flying instead though, since that was the second most requested type. Flying is a rather interesting type, with the most notable thing about it is that it's a common secondary type for the most part. It has some rather solid offensive utility, but at this point, it's mostly known for its Stealth Rock weakness. As per usual, the rules will go as follows. 1. This Pokemon isn't seen in a competitive match very much. Either there are more popular options, or the Pokemon just hasn't found its niche yet, assuming it could have one at all. 2. This Pokemon does not have as much of a following as other Pokemon of their type. They just aren't as popular, even though they probably could be if people realized their merits. 3. Because all lists are subjective and personal opinion, they have to be Pokemon I deem to be, simply put, just don't see anything at all. Not in competition, not as a design, not even in casual Pokemon chat. People simply just don't talk about it enough. If I already covered a Pokemon, I try not to cover it again if I can help it. I don't really have the greatest memory though, and the only flying types I remember covering are Articuno and Iron Jugulis, so I won't be putting them in the video. Anywho though, let's get started. Alright, so this is gonna be a rather strange one, since I normally talk about fully evolved Pokemon, but today I want to do something a little bit different. I think that Gligar is a little too overshadowed by Gliscor, despite the fact that Gligar is also pretty solid in its own right. Yeah, Gliscor and Landorus are arguably distinctly better. However, I would like to make a case as to why Gligar should see some usage. And I promise you that there is no bias from me playing Eviolite Gligar on national decks. I swear. Okay, I'm actually lying. It wouldn't be the first time I've made a biased take though, and it certainly won't be the last. God, I love Slurpuff. Now, as for Gligar, the ability it has to take hits once it has an Eviolite feels ridiculous. While it may not have Poison Heal or Intimidate, what it does have is raw tanking ability, and this ability allows it to do what Gliscor does pretty well, but with a different flavor of hit taking in mind. I like to run Stealth Rock, Toxic, U-Turn, and Earthquake myself, because not needing the trigger Poison Heal means I won't be running Protect. One of my fondest memories was messing around in National Decks Anything Goes and setting up Trick Room versus Miraidon, and suddenly my Gligar was both faster and walling it with Toxic and Roost. It's honestly my favorite way I've won a game. I think it's time Cimerant got its time in the sun. Sure, it isn't particularly anything special, however, I find that it's still a rather fascinating Pokemon. I love the fact that Gulp Missile is an ability, and running a Surf and Roost set with Ice Beam and Air Slash to keep my Cimerant both healthy and perfectly offensive, while being able to trigger Gulp Missile as much as I can, is pretty nice. Being able to threaten either a defense drop or paralysis is pretty crazy, and while it's absolutely a lower tier mon, I can't help but find it to be one of the more fun ones to use. It's also got a pretty funny design too, so it remains a personal favorite from Galar for that reason alone. Alright, so I think Kilowattrel is by all accounts a flawed Pokemon. While it is fast and powerful, it's also pretty frail, lacks coverage, and isn't Zapdos. Nor will it ever be Zapdos. But that doesn't mean there aren't pros to using Kilowattrel. It's just a lot more niche than Zapdos is all. I consider Kilowattrel to be one of the best users of Grass Terastallization, because a set with Terra Grass Terra Blast to hit Quagsire and Gastrodon, Weather Ball and Rain to hit other water and ground types, Hurricane for stab, and Thunder for power would make it quite the excellent sweeper. Sure, you may forego one of these to play Volt Switch, and that makes sense. But I honestly think that due to its sheer speed of 125 and its solid special attack of 105, it has what it takes to sweep a team using either an Expert Belt, Life Orb, or potentially choice specs if you really need it. However, I will also admit that it's only really good on Rain, a potential waste of a Terra if played wrong, and it isn't Zapdos, who is stronger and bulkier, albeit a little slower. It's worth using if you really like, but I don't blame people for using the current standard. I think there isn't enough love for Dodrio in this world. Yeah, it's sadly got some normal and flying type competition from Staraptor and Mega Pidgeot, but I still think that it's got some very cool stuff going for it. It has a base 110 speed stat, which passes the benchmark for what's considered pretty fast, and it has a pretty solid base 110 attack. Sure, you are lacking abilities that are useful, as Tangled Feet won't come up, Runaway is worthless, and Early Bird is fine. You aren't really running Rest and Sleep Talk sets, and you'd rather have Insomnia to eat a Spore. But only ever being asleep a now maximum of 2 turns thanks to Gen 9 sleep mechanics is better than what could be 3 turns. Also, while Dodrio is sadly a frail glass cannon, Dodrio is a late game sweeper who takes advantage of the move Swords Dance, which Staraptor does not get. Swords Dance, alongside access to tools like Knockoff, Stomping Tantrum, Double Edge, Jump Kick, and Brave Bird give it plenty of power to work with. Not to mention, it also gets Taunt, which turns bulkier Pokemon who rely on status moves into setup fodder. Go out there, at least in the lower tiers, and sweep whatever you can get your hands on. Although, I do wish they gave it something like Scrappy, or some move that lets it attack with all 3 of its heads. And no, Tri-Attack does not count. Even something like Defiant to beat Intimidate would be pretty cool. Hey! Hey! Do you know how long it took me to get here? Holding this orb while being burned? Oh. Hey, Swellow. Did you almost forget about me? You let Ed, and Eddie have the 7th spot? But you're literally remembering me when you've already gathered all the images and recorded the audio for this. Too many best teams, big guy? Swellow, sometimes it's just hard to remember. Oh, really? You and your rider remember the Pikachu sucker, but you can't remember Guts, these stats, Scrappy Boomburst? Was my golden performance with the electric rodent not good enough for your radar? Is Double Edge Reckless too cool for you too, buddy? You know what? Screw this. I'm number 7. Swallow, buddy, that's not how this works. What? You know what? I hope your commenters get mad at you, dick. So this is gonna be a very weird, underrated spot. And I'm not even sure if I am in the right putting it here. But I'm going to, because it is, by all accounts and all technicalities, a flying type. I think Mega Pincer might have gotten a bit too overlooked back in its heyday. I see why it wound up dropping out of OU, because having that massive Stealth Rock weakness was more than enough to make it unviable due to how omnipresent the Sneaky Pebbles have been. However, I think that if Charizard could make it work with enough support, then the tools that Mega Pincer brought to the table could have been utilized better. A base 105 speed stat, access to Swords Dance, and Aerial 8 turning its normal moves into Flying Stab and buffing them meant that Swords Dance, Quick Attack, Return, and Earthquake was very viable. And X-Scissor could see some use to hit the Megalati twins if need be. What held it back was Rocks and a bad matchup versus Intimidators. I think back in Generation 6, it was better than people made it out to be. But that's just a personal opinion. Regardless, it's still one of the cooler Mega Evolutions. And the fact that it's so happy that it can fly, that it doesn't touch the ground until its Mega wears off, is pretty wholesome. Alright, so this is admittedly a Pokemon most people like, and only call it bad due to its ability. But I think I would like to make a case that even with this ability, that was very clearly a sabotage from Aerodactyl, who bribed the game developers to make this happen, mind you. The Pokemon is still really good. Even with Aerodactyl trying to ruin Archeops' good name, I still think there is plenty of potential for it as a powerful cleaner. Base 140 attack and base 110 speed alongside 112 special attack is always going to be a savory prospect in any match, no matter how frail you are. With some careful play of getting it in, it can be a savage late game cleaner. Itemless acrobatics or having an item with dual wing beat are both solid options, and moves like Stone Edge, Earthquake, U-turn, and Knockoff can't just be ignored. You technically also get Roost, just in case you want to see how long you can make it last. Although I wouldn't recommend it unless you're the best player on Earth. Head Smash is also a great option for emergencies, and if you're willing to sack off your Archeops to make sure whatever the opponent has out drops. But there are better users of the move. I've seen it have varying success as a dedicated focus slash lead with Taunt, Stealth Rock, and 2 other moves, one of which is sometimes Tailwind, although usually it's just 2 powerful attacks. Despite Defeatist, there are ways to still make use of Archeops' capabilities. Just don't ever switch it into an attack, because then you're playing 5v6 and you're mad at yourself for it. I think that Sigilith is a pretty neat Pokemon. I like the lore behind it and how it was a guardian of an ancient city. And unlike certain unreliable, easily corrupted guardians from the Kingdom of Hyrule, these ones don't seem to have betrayed the ancient city they guarded. I wonder if Pokemon ever does more Legends games, like the much requested Legends Kyurem. Do you guys think we'll ever see the ancient city that Sigilith guarded? That would be pretty freaking cool. I also really like the design it has going for it. And admittedly, when I first saw it, I thought it had some connection to the Pokemon Unknown due to the eye on top of its head giving me the vibe. Now, what I bet some of you didn't know is that back in Generation 5 OU, it had a very slight niche in the tier. While I can't remember the specifics, I do remember it using Magic Guard to beat chip damage, and using Flame Orb and Psycho Shift to work as a budget Will-O-Wisp to burn physical attackers and give its team some needed leeway. However, this was incredibly niche, albeit incredibly sick. Nothing felt better than burning Tyranitar and making it feel less threatening. Alright, so this one I'm going to go a little more in depth with. I haven't really been talking a lot about movesets, items, etc. At least during the middle part of the video. In the beginning, I definitely did. The reason I didn't for the last few is because there was too much to dig into that you didn't already know, with the exception of Sigilith's small niche in Gen 5 OU. This Pokemon, however, I get to talk about because I have not only used it, but it's one of my favorites to use if I can find an excuse, despite its many issues. I am actually a diehard fan of swubat for a very simple reason. No pun intended. Simple Calm Mind is just Nasty Plot and Amnesia in the same move, because Simple doubles the effect of a stat-raising move, item, or ability. If Calm Mind isn't your deal, then using Nasty Plot will more than suffice, because Nasty Plot gives you a +4 special attack boost instead of a +2 thanks to Simple. This is incredibly powerful. It has a base 114 speed, which means it's remarkably quick, and a base 77 special attack, which looks bad until you use Nasty Plot, and suddenly, it's great. Its big issue is that it has a lot of weaknesses, a base 67 HP stat, and base 55 defenses. However, on the contrary, if you can find a turn for it to set up by forcing something out that swubat checks, and you get your Nasty Plot up, you can make use of Stored Power, Psyshock, Giga Drain, Heat Wave, Shadow Ball, Signal Beam, and various other potential gimmick moves like Taunt and Trick in case you want to cripple stall by tricking a Choice Scarf onto them and then Nasty Plotting up. It's a lower tier mon for sure, but I think that it's still plenty fun to pull off in a battle. I find Minior to be one of the most fascinating designs out of Gen 7. In terms of its lore, its unique ability, and how it plays as a result of the latter. Now, the lore makes me incredibly depressed too, because it occurs to me that the only reason this Pokemon even lives after you catch it is that you keep it in a Pokeball for its own protection, and that if it stays outside the Pokeball too long, it's probably not going to see the end of a battle. This makes me wonder, how does that work in terms of the legal system? Is using a Pokemon in battle that, according to the Pokemon Moon entry, will die off if its core remains exposed? Isn't this considered as abuse? Every battle you put it in is a danger to its life. If you don't put it in the Pokeball quick enough, it's going to the afterlife with Blue's Raticate. Is this not abuse? Is this not illegal? Personally, I think we need to start a movement. We need justice for Minior. It should not be forced to go through the trial of battle when battling is a danger to its very existence. Anyways, now that I'm going to go start a movement in favor of our rock, I will quickly talk about why I like it. I've discussed the lore and the unique ability, but I also think it has a really cool design, and thanks to its ability, it's a very solid Shell Smash sweeper. Although now that I think about it, since I am making it used Shell Smash, and then potentially exposing its core, I am no better. I am going to go and reform rather than give into my corruption, and we will save the Minior species. We'll get started on that after I talk about the number 1 spot. As per usual, I like to take a moment to talk about Pokemon that aren't underrated, but instead are perfectly rated. They have a fan base, people talk about it, there's no niche for it in a fight, or it's actually good and everyone knows that. The ones I'll bring up today are 1. Pidgeot. Pidgeot has a fan base and has a Mega, and without that Mega, it really isn't doing much with those lackluster stats and move pool. I also think Fearow is better in your playthrough. There is an argument to be made that Toucannon is cooler than people give it credit for, but it really just never clicked with me. Skill Link and base 120 attack is fine, but everything else about it isn't. And I hope you weren't expecting me to change my ways and say Squawkabilly is underrated. I still don't know why they made him so bad, but his Pompadour at least reminds me of a JoJo's protagonist I'm pretty fond of. Now, let's get the number 1. I think bringing back the gems would also be interesting buffs to Pokemon like Drifblim, Hawlucha, Grafaiai, and Sneasler, who all happen to have the option to run an Unburdened set. I, however, mostly want the gems to come back so we can have Flying Gem Acrobatics return. And I can use it on Jumpluff, who I deem to be the number 1 spot for this list. Why? Well, other than the fact that it's literally untiered because it found use in no competitive tier, due to the fact that it's sadly weak and not all that bulky, I never see talk of it at all. I only see people talking about Hoppip. Honestly, no one talks about Skiploom either. Maybe it should be on this list instead of Jumpluff. Maybe we can pretend they're both on here. Regardless, I think that not only is Jumpluff incredibly adorable, and I think it deserves many buffs and more ways to use it, I don't think that this Pokemon is bad per se. I just think that this Pokemon is very fun and interesting to use. It's got an okay base 75 HP, an alright base 70 defense, and a solid base 95 special defense. And of course 110 speed, and a very bad 55 on its offenses. What I find to be so fascinating about it is the various ways you can use the precious little cottonweed. It has Switcheroo, which is literally Trick. It has Sleep Powder, Strength Sap, the Screens, Memento, U-Turn, Synthesis, and Tailwind. There's a lot it can do to play the role of support and get your more offensively oriented Pokemon in the game so they can try to sweep. And of course, there's the funny option where you play the Swords Dance set with Acrobatics, Synthesis for sustainability, and then Terra Blast and your choice of Terra Sterilization if you don't go the Terra Flying route, or just play either Bullet Seed or Seed Bomb. Infiltrator is an amazing ability if you do play offensively, because it can beat screens, which periodically pop up in any metagame with either Grimmsnarl, Dragapult, or Alolan Ninetales in it. What holds it back is its horrendous defensive typing, its now unfortunately not as useful bulk, and its rather unfortunate bad offenses. But for what it's worth, despite the amount of competition it has, the amount of utility it has, and its speed, give it roll compression that a team in need of it can absolutely use. Not to mention, I think that while this Pokemon isn't perfect, Pokemon that are seen as bad pop up periodically in tiers they shouldn't be in for one reason or another. Experimentation can lead to meta developments, and one day I want to see a meta develop with Jumpluff in it. And that's all for today, folks. That was the top 10 most underrated flying types in my opinion. Let me know in the comments below what type you'd like me to talk about next. With this video over, I'm now gonna go play PU Ladder, just so I can adjust myself to using Jumpluff before trying to play it on OU and get rolled for a bit. Like I said, meta developments can happen with proper experimentation, so I think I'll do some experimenting too.